Here we have a special treat for you bike tech enthusiasts, the latest electronic shifting group set from Shimano. Welcome to Gadget Blues. This is KC, and today we are going to talk about some exciting new bike kit. This is the latest electronic shifting group set from Shimano, the 9150 group set. I'm going to give you my impressions of these components versus the previous ones. I'm not going to do any weights because other folks have already done weigh-ins on these. We are going to look at the 5 different applications used to communicate with these to do the programming, firmware updates, and so forth across phones, tablets, and PC, and talk a little bit about how the components talk to each other and what is necessary to upgrade an existing bike. The new components of the 9150 group set include the rear derailleur, front derailleur, the shift levers, the new battery, the BTDN110, which supports the new wireless units, the wireless unit itself, which is this little dongle that goes in line on the E2 wiring. This thing supports both Bluetooth and ANT+, whereas the previous Shimano modules supported only ANT+. The addition of Bluetooth allows you to update the firmware and set the configuration with an ordinary smartphone that supports Bluetooth. With the previous Shimano wireless unit, it only supported ANT+, and so you could only talk to it with a bike computer in order to see what your gear status was. You couldn't do any firmware updates or customization through ANT+. You needed to connect the USB interface unit through the junction box on 9070 or 6870 in order to do the customization and firmware updates. The USB interface box is still relevant, the SMBCR2, because there are a couple of things that you can only set via the PC software, and this essentially functions as a USB to CAN bus bridge that plugs into the junction box via this proprietary connector and runs Windows software to do the configuring and firmware updates. So while for 90% of people you can get by completely with the mobile applications, there are a couple of things for connoisseurs or shops that will still be using the USB interface. There is a new junction box to plug that USB interface into that goes in the end of the handlebars like a handlebar end plug. And I have that in the mail from Germany, but it hasn't arrived yet. So at the moment, I'm still using the existing junction box, which normally mounts underneath the stem. This is the port for that USB interface that I just showed you. And it has a couple of LEDs to indicate that it's in Bluetooth mode or the level of the battery and so forth. All of this is the same as the previous generation. Looking at the components themselves, let's take a look at the front derailleur. This is very similar to the previous generation in appearance, except it's a little more black. It's just a little bit of gray around here and mostly gloss black around the top. The E2 port is in a completely different place. In fact, if you unplug that, you will notice that it's kind of hard to see that there is in fact a port there. I was looking around this, looking for the port, and I couldn't find it until I looked very closely there, and that's where it is. Ironically, it goes so deeply in there that you can't use the tool to pull it out. You just have to pull on the cord, which is not the greatest design in my opinion. Also, Shimano has stuck with this stupid sticker as the cog alignment method vertical. That didn't seem like a big deal until I tried the SRAM ETAP, and that has a alignment gauge permanently etched into the derailleur, which was very handy. Similarly, there is absolutely nothing on the top here to function as a visual indicator for top, that is side-to-side alignment of the cogs. maybe that little crimp there, but again, I'm spoiled by the SRAM ETAP, which has indicators on both ends that you can align with the cog to make it very straight the first time. This still requires a little bit of fiddling. Note there is only one limit screw now. The other limit is done electronically on this version. Looking at the rear derailleur, as you've probably seen if you've been keeping up with 9150 in the press, it's a radically different design from the previous derailleur. And it has a much longer cage for the pulleys. This cage is longer mostly because of the whole new geometry of the derailleur, but a side effect of this is that they are now able to accommodate a 30-tooth cassette with this, whereas previously it was limited to a 28, while on Ultegra you could get an extra long cage that does 32. Let me show that to you. Here is the Ultegra 6870 long cage version that takes a 32. Note that that's considerably longer than the 30 capacity 9150. I would compare that with my 9070, but I have a burner cage on this one, rather exotic bit of tech out of Germany, so it doesn't make a apples to apples comparison. However, you can see that the 9150 is definitely longer. Clearly, the derailleur design is completely different than 9070. All of the geometry and the layout are different. The hanger is wildly different with this separate pivoting piece as opposed to having it be right a part of the main chassis. They have moved the E-tube connection greatly inboard from the previous port. So we'll see how that aligns with things. It's also slanted outwards a little bit, if you can see that, versus the chain line. Looking at the shift levers, this is the 9150 lever, and here's a 9070 lever. Visually, they're very similar. You can see that the 9150 is a little bit narrower, especially at the tip there. It's probably a weight reduction. The hoods feel very, very different. They're very rubbery on the 9070, and they feel a little bit more plasticky when you're bending them on the 9150. However, the benefit of this seems to be that while it's easier to roll up the hood on the 9070, it does not go up very high or stay in place very easily. It tends to come back down when you're trying to get a hex driver in to attach these. On the 9150, the installation is a lot easier because when you fold this up, it stays in place and you have a pretty good access to that screw. There is a little bit more surface area on the 9150 levers versus the 9070. You can see how dramatically easier it is to access the Di2 ports on the 9150 with the extra distance that the hood rolls up versus on the 9070. So this is a boon for mechanics everywhere. You still have the three connections here. Two of these are E-tube connections that connect to smart components, such as the new climbing shifters that you can put on the center of the bars. And the third one is a dumb port for non-smart switches like the sprint shifters that are just contact closure items. Another thing you can use the second E-tube port on here for, if you are not running the climbing shifters, is to go back into the handlebars to connect to the bar end junction port, the EWRS 910. The battery is the BT-DN110. There appear to be three models of these, but I can't find any documentation as to what the difference is between the three, and the only one on sale at the moment is the -1. So perhaps these are for anticipated future revisions so they don't have to change the packaging. The battery itself is identical to the previous battery form factor for the interior mount battery, just the different part number. This battery is important because it has the smarts of the system and it's required to use the new wireless transceiver modules. It's also required for the synchronized shifting feature that is new in 9150. Speaking of the wireless unit, the internal version is the EWWU111. And that is this little guy right here that goes in line in the E-tube wiring. Well, I call this the internal version. It can, of course, be used internal or external. There is another version that is external specific that is normally strapped onto the chainstay with a little kit that comes with it. Where on the bike you mount this thing really depends on what you want to use it for. If you are only using it for configuration and for firmware updates, you don't even really need to mount it on the bike per se at all. You can just use it when you want to perform those actions. If you get a short E-tube cable, you can patch this in anywhere there's an external wire, at the front derailleur, the rear derailleur, anywhere on the bike. If you want to get the gear indication and so forth via ANT+ for your head unit, you probably want to have this near the front of the bike because the human body full of water is a good thing to block 2.4 gigahertz transmission, and so you wouldn't want this behind you. One of the logical places that people might put this is right after the battery inside the seat post, but that's between a lot of your body and the bike computer. So if you want to use this to get the gear readouts on your computer, I would put it up front, either inside the handlebars along with your E-tube wiring or in the line that goes from the handlebars into the frame. The major criteria for choosing this unit over the WU101, which is the purely external unit, is based on your frame material. If you want to mount this inside the frame somewhere in order to have a really clean build look, then you're going to need to have a carbon bike. If you have a metal bike, it will probably block a lot of the frequency from this. Both ANT+ and Bluetooth are 2.4 gigahertz. Some of it will leak out through a metal bike frame, especially bouncing around and then coming out through openings that have, say, a carbon seat post in them. So I've heard of some folks using the previous ANT+ only unit that was designed to be external inside the frame of a metal bike and actually getting success, but I think that is a corner case. You probably want to use the internal one on carbon frames and the external one on metal frames. These components are pretty mix and match between generations. Here I have plugged the 9070 shift lever in with all the rest of the 9150 components, including the 9150 right shift lever, and we can see that it shifts the front derailleur and shifts the rear derailleur. So even mixing generations from left to right still works. There are some mysterious requirements from Shimano on exactly what components are required to enable synchronized shifting, and we'll have more on that as that develops. Far as I know, synchronized shifting needs the front derailleur, the rear derailleur, and the new battery, but time will tell. One thing I did notice that the system will not charge via the USB charger if there is a current Bluetooth connection, so keep that in mind. You're going to need to disconnect the Bluetooth on the mobile device in order to charge the system. So here's the E-tube project app on the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge. This is version 3.2.0, the same as the other apps. They all carry the same version number at the moment. And the same Bluetooth LE firmware version. The menus are a little bit different than the tablet. In fact, this looks like it's designed for the phone. On the tablet, I had to scroll up and down through these selections when in landscape mode. All the same for left and right. Same settings as on the tablet. I should note that Samsung is absolutely the best platform to use with bicycles because it's really not well known, but all of the Samsung modern tablets and phones have Ant Plus built in. While we're using Bluetooth here to talk to the new module, the phone also has Ant Plus, and so it's great for doing firmware updates and configuration of other devices that you might have that are Ant Plus only, including power meters and so forth. Okay, so here it is on the iPhone 6S. This looks absolutely identical to the Android version. I don't see any difference here whatsoever. The app version is the same across Android and iOS 3.2.0. Just like on the Android phone version, there is no error check capability in the iPhone version. You can install the smartphone version of the app on an Android tablet, but it complains when you start it up that it cannot be used on a tablet. So Shimano really should have set those attributes in the Play Store so you can't install it and then find out that it doesn't work. If you search for eTube Project in the Play Store on a tablet, the only thing you will be offered is eTube Project 4. Well, that's actually eTube Project for smartphone once you get into the item, and that will not install. So I couldn't find this except by scrolling down here, and there's more by Shimano, and here's eTube Project for tablet. This would not install properly until I uninstalled the phone version of the app that didn't work. On the Android tablet version, I had to retry the Bluetooth connection several times before it succeeded. So the Android tablet app, at least on the Samsung, does not seem to be as solid in the Bluetooth connection as on the iPad. Once into the app, everything looks identical to the iOS version. It seems to fit a couple more of these on the screen. I had to scroll to see all of the items on the iOS app. So both of the tablet apps, the iOS and the Android, have the error check capability, and both of the phone versions do not. That really doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how they chose to implement it. There are essentially 5 versions of this app. There is a phone version on iOS and Android, and a tablet version on iOS and Android, and then there is a Windows version. These apps, though they require the new Bluetooth module and a new battery, because the smarts are in the battery, will work with the older group sets. And if you look in the lists of components, you'll see that they do list the 9070 and other older components. So it looks like it doesn't matter what derailleurs and shifters you have. It only matters that you have the battery with the smarts to talk to the Bluetooth module and the Bluetooth module, and you're good to go. There is a new external battery holder as well. So even if you aren't running an internal battery, you can upgrade to the new external battery to support the Bluetooth. In the external version, I believe the smarts are in the battery holder, not in the battery itself. I have the new battery holder, which says it supports Bluetooth. I am upgrading an existing bike with that, and I will report back on compatibility. So here we are in the Windows version of the eTube software. They keep the same version number across all of the platforms. So you'll see that this one is 3.2.0, the same as the iOS and Android versions. Of course, this is a very different application. We are connected via the Shimano SMBCR2 USB interface, which plugs into the junction box. All of the functionality on here is the same as the Android and iOS apps, with one major exception, which I'll get to in a moment. I should note that the items in here are much less intuitive than in the mobile apps. Shimano has done a good job at making things visual. One thing that you will notice here is that there is a front derailleur adjustment now in the new software for the 9150, because of course the front derailleur now has only one limit screw and the rest of the adjustment is done electronically. Similar to the mobile apps, you can set your two shift modes that you can toggle between with the buttons on the unit to synchronized shift or semi-synchronized shift. And you configure the chainring and cog sizes so it knows what the gear ratios are to do the synchronized shift. The major difference here, the one setting that you have to use this software to change, is the gear number limit setting. By default out of the box, this setup came with a 2-gear limit. That means that out of the box it will not shift to the 2 highest gears or the 2 lowest gears in cross-chain. So if that annoys you, then you can turn it off. But you have to use the Windows software to do so. Clearly, you shouldn't be cross-chaining onto the 2 largest or smallest gears, but a lot of people say they want complete control over the way their group set behaves, and so that option is there to turn it off. Have to use the Windows software, so if you had planned on doing all of your configuration and firmware updates with the new mobile applications, you're going to need to buy a beer for your local bike shop to have them do this one setting for you. For synchro shift, you also have settings on how it adjusts to compensate for front and rear. Here is the default settings for 5034 and 1130, which is the configuration that I will be running to start with. It's an interesting chart here, and I will probably understand it more intuitively how this works once I get a chance to write it. Remember to always hit the complete setup button before disconnecting the USB interface. Okay, I've run into a little bit of a hitch here. I disabled the shift limit and it is still in force for one end of the cassette. Looks like you can only disable the shift limit for big ring to big cog, but you can't disable the 2-gear shift limit for little ring to little cog. Allow me to demonstrate right now. We are on the big ring, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we've got all 10 gears there. If we shift into the little ring, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. That's 8 positions, which means 9 gears, which means we are locked out of the 2 rings on the rear cog when in the little chainring in front. I think that's going to bother some folks that are control freaks about having complete control over their drivetrain, even if it's a cross-chain scenario that they shouldn't be doing. Maybe you need to do it for just a minute. This might be an issue for those folks. We'll see if Shimano is willing to remove that restriction in a future firmware update. So that's the Shimano Dura-Ace 9150 group set. The 9170 with the hydraulic disc brakes is also coming out in the very near future, so we should see some info on that. I recently upgraded one of my bikes to SRAM ETAP, and it is noticeably slower shifting than the previous 9070 Di2, so high hopes for this to be even better than 9070. I think it's a significant speed benefit over ETAP. ETAP, of course, has its own advantages in being compatible with any frame, even if it isn't Di2 ready, being easier to install and so forth, but As far as ultimate performance is concerned, 9070 has been it. I'm going to throw this onto the bike, and I will be back with some riding impressions once I've had a chance to get some miles on these. I am still on the lookout for compatible handlebars to put the bar end junction box, the EWRS 910 in. I have that 910 on the way from a German bike retailer, and it should be here in a few days. More on all of this as it develops. So please, thank you for watching, and like and subscribe. We'll have more content on bikes coming soon. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you in the next Gadget Blues.